In this video, we examine what exactly astronomers fear and what impact this will have on NASA's upcoming projects. Before we begin, though, we'd like to ask for your input. Leave us a comment after the video on the topic, and we'll reward our subscribers' comments with a heart. We'll even pin your important contributions at the top. Make sure you already have a subscription, like the video, and mention both at the beginning of your comment. For years, everything was quiet around the moon, but all of a sudden, things have completely changed much faster than anticipated. Humans could land on the moon again, and even a manned moon station is being planned, but scientists warn that the moon is not safe for now. Music. It took decades for the foreign to reach the moon, but last year it did. The excitement surrounding the new James Webb Telescope and its amazing discoveries overshadowed this ambitious NASA effort, which launched Artemis 1 to the moon. The fact that Artemis 1's launch was repeatedly delayed and that the test flight was ultimately unmanned may have contributed to the relatively low level of interest. Everything went as planned when the first Orion space capsule, Artemis 1, was launched into space. It flew to the moon for 6 days, orbited it all at once, and then returned. The next Orion space capsule launch will include both male and female astronauts who will be the first humans to fly in space. An African American and a female astronaut will be on the first mission to set foot on the moon in almost 50 years. Because there has never been a woman or a man of color on the moon, NASA placed special emphasis on Artemis, which is meant to represent the way of the future and a turning point for humanity's entry into space. This was to be made up for during the first landing. The Artemis program ultimately represents the notion that all people will travel to the moon and space. In fact, NASA must get active if it hopes to stay competitive in the race for space colonization and manned spaceflight. Not only are multi-billionaires Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos's SpaceX and Blue Origin gradually surpassing NASA, but China is also starting to enter space. At the moment, China has a rover on Mars, one on the moon, and a lunar probe orbiting it. The plans of NASA. The Artemis project got underway in 2010 when then-President Barack Obama approved a $58 billion budget in the NASA Authorization Act to fund the project's advancement, among other things. Besides NASA-ESA, the European Space Agency. The projects involve Canada's CSA and Japan's JAXA. 3 phases are planned for the Artemis project. The new spacecraft and the launch vehicles that go with them will be tested by Artemis 1. The components of a permanent lunar station will be sent to our partner after a few successful manned trips. Artemis 2 will eventually deploy exploration teams to the moon, initially consisting of motley crews of scientists and astronauts. The first manned lunar station is what Artemis 3 hopes to create. It's still unclear if Artemis 3 will actually be the first station. Elon Musk's SpaceX space company might be quicker after all. The Artemis program has drawn attention thus far, primarily due to delays. The first Orion capsule was scheduled to make its test flight to the moon in 2017. However, there were significant delays once more, and it wasn't released until 2022. The date was originally set for August, but NASA moved the launch to September, and then it was November before the new SLS rocket could finally take off from the Kennedy Space Center spaceport. Although humans weren't on board this time, the 4 seats in the capsule were still occupied by Snoopy, Shaun the sheep, and other stuffed animals. The dolls also had sensors to measure space radiation and served as weightlessness test subjects. Since NASA had to end its space shuttle program for safety concerns, the first Orion launch was hailed as a huge success. However, the question of whether NASA and SpaceX will go to the moon together remains unanswered. The agency has effectively collaborated with Elon Musk, the inventor of SpaceX, whose Dragon spacecraft have been transporting humans to the International Space Station for 3 years. The Orion spacecraft is part of NASA's Artemis program. However, prior spacecraft have not been able to land on the moon. Therefore, a unique spacecraft that can land on lunar surface is needed. Under the Artemis program, SpaceX's Dragon space shuttles will continue to carry out this function. In order to move astronauts from the spacecraft to the land shuttles on the Moon itself, Artemis also intends to put up a space station in the Moon's orbit. Future astronauts and scientists will reside at the Artemis Moon Base. The missions. Primary objective is to conduct scientific exploration of the Moon, which also entails securing financial gains. NASA states these objectives in these words: "The United States will continue to lead the way in discovery and exploration. We will form a global alliance and open up space together for the benefit of all." But it's definitely not that selfless blue origin. NASA wants to be the first to the Moon in order to secure the best seats should the Chinese or possibly even the Indians put out feelers for the Earth's satellite. Some scientists are very concerned about the idea of large-scale colonization of the Moon or even industry on the Moon, but Chief Jeff Bezos is currently experimenting with plans to establish the Moon as a long-term site for heavy industry for Earth. This would simply mean moving branches of industry that pollute the climate and waters here to the Moon. No one can currently predict how industries or colonization will alter the Moon, and in addition to these uncertainties, there are other occurrences on the Moon that raise concerns. Haven't we done enough on Earth with heavy industry, exhaust fumes, and trash, and seen where that leads? There may be a very straightforward but terrifying explanation for the startling number of summers that scientists are measuring on the Earth satellite. The Moon gets smaller. Even though the Moon appears to have no continental plates and exhibits very little other geological activity, it shakes remarkably frequently, which is why NASA has been tracking the Moon's surface activity since the first humans set foot on it in the 1960s. A seismometer records every tremor, no matter how small, and some incredible things have been discovered. Orbiter observed wrinkles and more or less pronounced cracks on the surface of the Moon for years. Astronomers and geologists evaluated the collected data and then came to a conclusion that could severely call into question any use or even settlement of the Moon. The Moon certainly once possessed a hot core. This realization also led astronomers to believe that the Moon may, in fact, have once been a microplanet that attached itself to the Earth's magnetic field over billions of years. The Moon has now cooled down more and more. These processes appear to be ongoing at present. That means that the Moon must still possess warmth in the inside. However, it loses this gradually and thereby it contracts. The Moon shrank demonstrably around about 100 meters. However, this over the course of the last 4 billion years, with this circumstance now endanger Moon settlements, or even an economic location on the Moon. Well, researchers do not know yet exactly for this reason. The Artemis 2 and 3 missions are to bring first scientists on the Moon. They will stay there far longer than all previous lunar travelers, ETI. Record set by the Apollo 17 astronauts was around 3 days. The first Artemis lunar pioneers are expected to stay on the Moon for up to a week or even longer, conducting extensive studies and measurements, water on the Moon. Until a few years ago, astronomers completely underestimated the Moon, believing it to be dust, dry, and, in some ways, boring. However, as more and more NASA and ESA probes, and eventually the Indian probe Chandrayaan-1, discovered evidence of water, not only at the poles but also in craters and in many other Moon regions, large occurrences of water ice could be proven. Long-term, the manned lunar base will serve as a stopover for space travelers who will take humanity's next step into space. Spacecraft heading for Mars sometime in the next 20 years may stop over on the Moon or be resupplied with fuel from there. Additionally, the Artemis Moon Base is planned as a test center for the use of extraterrestrial raw materials on the Moon. Experiments will be made for the first time to work with the raw regolith under space conditions, and the lunar powder could be used to make buildings, roads, and more. Metals for tools would be found in the raw materials available on site. Regolith consists of oxides of silicon iron, titanium, aluminum, magnesium, and is also the most abundant rock on Mars to make it useful. The oxides must be converted into pure elements. This is exactly what the Artemis pioneers will test. In addition, the first test of permanent oxygen supply for astronauts and living capsules on the surface of a celestial body. Far from Earth will take place on the Moon, the existing regolith. Rock and ice are sufficient to be able to produce oxygen and even propellants on site if the tests on the Moon are successful. Humans could also venture towards the colonization of Mars. This all sounds exciting, doesn't it? In just a few years, the first humans could be living on the Moon. Would you volunteer for such a mission? Or do you view the colonization of other planets, or even the Moon, with more apprehension? Let us know and share your opinion or expertise with us. We welcome all engaged. And valuable comments, don't forget to mention your subscription if you have one. And to like the video. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.